There we are. Well, we are the last tough ones, right? Lasting all the way to the end of this. But this, I'll do a very quick talk because you don't want. I come from Scandinavia, and there you don't want to stand between a group of people and the beer. So I won't take too much of your time, but I want to do a quick talk of this. This is normally a 50-minute talk, so we're going to do a speed version of how you bring startup innovation into larger companies. And my name is Tina. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I've started and run 6 tech startups, and then I'm involved with all this other stuff you can see on the side. And what I want to share with you is my learnings from the years where I've been an entrepreneur and where I'm an advisor to other tech entrepreneurs to see what it is we can use in the corporate world. So we can all agree that innovation is important, right? But what's really causing this confusion is we're not quite sure what causes it. But what we can see is that it's definitely not previous success. And the numbers are quite clear on that, right? Previously, when you were in Fortune 500, you tended to stay there for around 75 years. So it almost felt that once you made it up there, you were almost sure to stay. But today, the reality is quite different. Today, the average time that you spend on Fortune 500 is only 15 years. So that we would like to change, right? The new ideal and the new focus of the corporate world in trying to catch up is these hyper tech startups. These tech startups that grow so fast that we have never been able to imagine before. And as you look here, I've put a list of some of the notable ones that we're all focused on this day and age. And then I put one of the biggest companies in the region where I come from, which is Maersk, the biggest shipping company in the world. And as you can see, they're on there up there with some of the big American ones. But then if you start looking at when Maersk was created and when many of these traditional European and also Turkish big corporates were created, then we really start seeing the difference. Because a company like Maersk, even though it's almost as big as, or it's not even as big as Facebook, then it only took Facebook since 2004 to get to $250 billion valuation. So that's more than 5,000% faster these best of these companies are growing. So of course we would like to harvest and understand what that is. All in all, if you sum it up, then the problem with established business is complexity. It is that we started with rules that were meant for a much smaller and a much simpler kind of organization. And when there was something we needed to explain, we built a procedure or a process, and then people could know what to do that. That was how we scaled. But as business is getting so complex today, that's not enough anymore, because we're building procedure upon procedure upon procedure and rules and KPIs after the other. So in the end, we are struggled and strangled by all of these procedures. A really great example, I come from banking originally, is in banking you have a front office that deals with the customers, and then you have a back office that does all the operation and actually makes sure the transactions are being done. And what do you do when the front office and the back office can't communicate? You create a middle office. But what do you then have? Instead of having one front that can't communicate, now you have 2 fronts that can't communicate. And it's a great example of how we're trying to fix the same problems with the same solution, and when that solution doesn't work, we try it again and again and again, and in the end you're totally squeezed up. And what actually is happening now is that sometimes all of these processes are making our business worse. There's a French expert in this that says that every company that he's worked on wastes between 20 and 80% of their effective time on processes and ineffectiveness, 80% of the time. I mean, it's no big surprise that these companies can't communicate, right, or they can't compete. So what I would actually ask everyone to ask themselves is that all of these words that we've been taught and hammered into our heads again and again and again are like the framework for building good business, like clarity and measurement and accountability. Well, are they really working, or are they really doing the opposite for us? Are they starting to take the human element out? And the way that I like to measure it in my companies is that I would like us to focus more on action than on activity. And activity is all of this stuff that we do when we feel really busy, but the customers who sit on the other side or anyone in the outside world doesn't notice that it happened. You know, so activity is like writing reports or preparing statements or having reporting meetings and all of that stuff, or doing analysis and sitting and doing stuff. We all have days where we are incredibly busy with all of this activity stuff. But when we actually look back at the end of the day of what have I produced that the world can see, then we have done nothing of it. So the more we can do of action versus activity brings us a little bit back to that forefront of getting stuff out there, you know. In startup, you say, and not so polite, you say, fuck it, just ship it, right? And that is getting stuff out of the ground. And another way of calling it is they say that done is better than perfect. Because how long does a project take? Have you ever been involved with a project that finished early? Never. It doesn't exist, right? It doesn't. A project will take as long as you give it. So if you have 6 months to do it, that's what it takes. If you have 2 months, then you'll get as far as you can in those 2 months, but you'll still be finished with that part. When we're doing all of this and we're looking at all of this activity versus action, then we're realizing that much of this activity is due to process. But what is process really? Why do we have process in companies? Well, we have process because people no longer understand what they're supposed to do and how it fits into the larger context. So process is a proxy for understanding. If everyone understood how their companies worked in entirety, then there wouldn't be need for processes. And it's putting it a bit on the edge because, of course, you need some systems, but do we need as much as that? There was that great example with a car manufacturer who started taking much longer for a car to be repaired when it came in. Because today a car is a mechanical thing, right? It's an electronical machine. So with all of this stuff that needed to put in, the designers and the builders were stuffing it in between boards and stuff that couldn't be taken out, and suddenly they couldn't serve the warranty periods anymore on these cars. And they started threatening the engineers with that on 5 years, when all of these cars start needing to be repaired, we'll shift you to the after-service department. And suddenly these designers and builders got a motive and a motivation for why it should be easy, not just look nice in the beginning, but also be easy to repair. And I think it's a good example of how if you understand how much of a nightmare you're creating for someone else in your company by doing something in one way, then probably you wouldn't do it. Most people are nice and most people try to do good. But in a big corporation in particular, even sometimes in a smaller company, it can be really, really hard to understand the consequences of your action because you just don't know what really happens after the thing leaves your desk. In my last company, we were just 65 people, but already then the sales department had no idea what the developers did, and the tech department had no idea what marketing did. So if it starts already then, I can only imagine how it is to work in a company of 30,000 people. What also creates this high productivity, which is something that startups and small companies can do very well, is that people are motivated by different things than money. Do you know that all of the good people, including yourself who are in this room, all of the best people are no longer motivated by money? It's a big statement, right? But when we don't have any money, it's incredibly important. But after we reach a certain level, then it becomes less and less important because our basic needs are already satisfied. And I bet you either have considered it yourself or you know someone who has considered quitting their big and safe job with a much bigger salary for something that gives more meaning, or something that's more challenging, or something that's more interesting. Today we're starting to see that very clearly, and it's going to be a massive trend. In 10 years the labor market is going to look totally different because of this, because people are seeking meaning. And what they realize is that the reason that people are productive isn't because there's like a bonus structure at the end of the year. It's if there's flexibility, if they can have influence, if there's purpose to what they're doing, and if they like their colleagues. So does anyone know who this is on the picture here? This is the Tahiti football team. How many of you knew that Tahiti had a football team? No, right? We barely know. If we're lucky, we know where Tahiti is. So I'm amazed they have 11 people to put on the field in the right age group, right? That's how small Tahiti is on my head. But I'm taking a stab out in the dark there that these guys don't win that many matches. So do they need to be motivated? Does that need to be fun to keep turning up in a national team where you lose every time? It totally does, right? And in many companies are like that. We don't win all the time. It's tough business competing out there. So we need to find reasons to be motivated and productive even when we're not winning. And fun is a good way of doing that, and purpose is another one. So these are the 3 first principles in this hypergrowth that these startups do. Let go of a little bit of control. That's easier said than done, but it really is necessary because all of these processes and procedures are starting to just be totally strangling the companies, and they're certainly strangling the people that work in them. We need more action, and then we need understanding rather than process. The good news here on my last 5 minutes when we're talking innovation is that it's not something that requires a genius. You know, we have this picture of innovation where there's a guy, so typically an old guy like that, or someone who sits out in the prairie and, you know, it's totally desolate and he sits alone with his mind and he gets this brilliant idea, and that's where you solve one of the world's biggest problems. Lucky for those of us who are not, haven't got the IQ of Einstein, or who are way too busy to sit out in the prairie in a cottage to do big thinking. That's not actually how innovation is created. It's no solitary genius. It's hardly ever a eureka moment. And it's not something that you need to have an IQ of 200 to do. A really good example is the Post-it note. Do you all know Post-it notes? You've heard of them, right? Do you use them every day? Yeah, I use them a lot. I even have them in my bag, right? I put them on the walls in the hotel rooms if I get good ideas. But the Post-it notes, they sell 50 million or 50 billion of these things. And that was created by accident. It was actually, and this is a little bit scary, they found it out when they were trying to make super glue for airplanes. Not nice, right? I'm very glad they found out that before they were testing it in any of the things I'm flying in. But then they played with it, and they took one employee and later another employee, and it was only many years later when one employee was fixing that when he was at choir practice, the notes kept falling down off the note stand, and he was just looking through what they had in the archives and in the bags, and then he started gluing the stuff on because it was like glue that didn't work properly, and it didn't ruin his notes, but they stayed up. And that's how Post-it notes were invented, and today they sell 50 billion. And I think if you can sell 50 billion of pieces of paper with bad glue on, then there's hope for all of us in creating some cool innovation, right? And that generally is one of the important rules if you want to do something cool, is that it has to be okay to make mistakes. And it has to be okay that what we first assumed that something was going to help us with and what problem it was going to solve, it has to be okay that it ends up doing something else and that it fails. Because if you look at the venture investors, we've seen some today, then they don't all succeed, right? Even the best of investors have maybe 1 in 10 that become successful. And that's really, really hard stuff. I know, to go back to you CEOs and say you need to invest serious money in this, and by the way, 9 out of 10 is going to fail. But it is how it works. We need to build a different culture where failure is seen as we are trying to learn and we're trying to test something rather than something didn't work. And in my companies, I started asking people on our Monday status meeting to find out what we learned last week, not just what did we achieve, because it meant that we feel that even though we didn't find a solution to something, perhaps we got further in the process. And that's a much more motivating feeling than, shit, another thing that didn't work. You can write that off, right? So if you start doing lines on the wall that, okay, now we've tried 5 things to solve that project, on to number 6 and see whether this is the real problem solver. I think it gives a sense of purpose and progress. And essentially that's it, right? Keep it small, experiment. One of the reasons why corporates are so afraid of experimenting is that it's always been enormously expensive. And that's because we have this tendency in corporate to do everything perfect and then we ship it. You know Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn? I guess you know LinkedIn, yes? They did okay. He says that if you're not a little bit embarrassed by your product, you're launching too late. And it kind of goes to the culture that first we put something out there and we see whether anyone is using it, and if no one is using it, there's no point of doing the rest. In the software companies that I have, we put buttons on that are not buttons yet, so it's just a little, it looks like a button, and then if people click on it, it says, thank you for your feedback. Now when we know you want this feature, we will build it for you. Because what if no one was going to use that feature, and then we just spend a month in development time making it? when we're doing this, it means that we need a couple of more people into the companies, right? We've been good at hiring scalers, like these guys here, the CEO of Ford and the CEO of one of the big American banks. But actually, we need starters. The new growth are started by a ridiculously different kind of people, right? Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, you can look here. They would never be gainfully employed in any serious Wall Street firm, right? Like you don't employ people that don't wear shoes and only dress in t-shirts. But perhaps it's worth having a few of these. So those are the last 6, or the last 3, that takes us to 6. Try many things, respond to the market feedback quickly before it gets too expensive, and then invest. Invest in both people and in products. So this takes courage, and that's the main reason why we don't do it. It's also the main reason why people who want to start their own business don't do it. It's because it's scary. It's because in what you achieve and your track record, it's a lot of your identity. And we are much more comfortable with playing within the field where we know that we can deliver, because we want to deliver something good when it reflects on us. But it takes courage to go out and create something big, and that's really the essence. So the last thing, when we wrap up, the last 30 seconds between you and the red wine is a very, very easy trick, which is that the space, the physical surrounding, actually has an impact on how creative we are and how we think. So I will argue that in my experience, I have a co-working space with 60 companies. The office of a creative, innovative team looks a little bit less like this. To whom is this familiar? Have you ever been into an office that looks a little bit like this? And most of them do, right? But perhaps it looks more like this. Or this one with the swings. Or this is a boardroom of the world's most popular creative advertising agency, right? Beautiful, right? Or what about this one? This is Lego's headquarters. Carousels in the office. Google are very good at it. Google is one of the companies that managed to feel like a startup, even though they have 20,000 employees. And then the last one is this one here, and this one has a special feeling for me, because Airbnb makes their offices, or the meeting rooms in their offices, as a replica of some of the rooms they are renting out across the world. And this room here is called Nordic, and that's a copy of my apartment. So hilariously, when I went to Airbnb headquarters, I had a meeting with the CEO, and we were in his office, but in my apartment, so we were both on home turf. So I'll end with that, and thank you very much, and I hope you have a good evening.